This video is how to mount a battery in the trunk the Nhra legal way. This is a diagram of how my car, which is a 91 Camaro, is currently wired in stock form. This is generally how cars are wired, but not all cars. So if you're not sure how your car is wired, check a wiring schematic. In my car, and pretty much all third gens, in order to make a trunk mount battery legal, you need two things. One is you have to isolate the alternator and the battery on one end of a disconnect switch, and everything else on the other end of the disconnect switch. That's so if your car rolls over, God forbid, in the track, somebody can run in the back and shut the car off if the motor's still running, so you won't catch on fire. Second thing to note on a car without a trunk, like a third gen, a hatch car, or any hatch car, you need to have it mount the battery inside an Nhra box, approved box, which I have a blue Moroso box, which is good to use. And you need a certain size bolts, so far and so forth with that. And check any of your other sanctioning bodies exactly to the rules what they require for you to do. Okay, so this is how my car is wired. The battery's in the front, the alternator. This 3-wire alternator. You got the charge wire, goes straight to the battery, positive. And there's little junction blocks, sorry, a junction block that comes off the positive wire. Then you have a wire going from positive from the battery straight to the starter motor, and that's what is used to power the starter motor when the solenoid energizes. Then you have the two other wires coming out of the alternator. One is a remote voltage sensor that senses how much voltage is being put to the battery to see if it should increase the voltage or not. And the other wire is the excite wire, which in this case it goes to my regular harness. It goes to the dash and tells you if the alternator, the noid light in the dash, if you need an alternator or not. And that is ignition switched on source, which also is excites or gives energy to the iron rotor inside the alternator, which once that happens, which is regulated by the regulator, magnetizes the iron or rotor, and as it turns, the stator collects the electricity from the magnetic field and shoots it out to the battery. So this is generally how car charging systems work, electrical. Now this is how to wire it Nhra legal style, Nhra, for drag competitions. You have your disconnect switch, which you wire to the back of the car, with the switch sticking out in the back. And you can't have one of those switches where you take the key out. That's illegal, because if the car flips over and the key breaks, then you're screwed, or comes out when you're flipping or whatever have you, then you're screwed. Okay, in any case, this is how it is. Generally everything, like I said before, the alternator and the battery are on one side of the switch, as you can see here. The starter is also here, but I'll get to that in a second. It's not energized all the time. That's why I have a 4-solenoid type solenoid here. Disconnect switch. Then you have a junction terminal here. Ignition hot source turns everything on here. Okay, so let's start this. Let's start with the starter. Starter has a 1/0 gauge wire going to it, a welding cable, to a Ford type starter solenoid, then another 1/0 gauge to the battery, and a negative goes down to ground. Sorry, goes down to the frame of the car, the ground. Now this cable is the thickest cable in the wiring diagram here, you could see, and it's a good thing to wire it only hot at a starter's ignition start, when ignition is on start. Otherwise this is always off. The wire going to the S terminal on the solenoid, the starter, is going to be rerouted all the way to the starter solenoid. So when you turn that switch, it turns the solenoid on, which energizes over here. The magnetic field pulls it over, and you're connected over here. Once you take that S wire off the starter, then you can have a little jumper, little cable or what have you, little terminal connector. So you bypass that switch in the solenoid. Okay. Also, remember we had the starter as it was basically like a junction block. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but if you look at your starter, like for example in a third gen my car, you're going to see this essentially acts like a junction block because you have all of the wires coming out of here connected to the battery. You also see all the fusible links connected to it, yada yada yada. It's everything there. Alright, back to this. Alright. So this is on at start, off when your regular ignition hot. The alternator, remember here we had it's a 3-wire alternator. The charge wire will go down here to the starter solenoid. This is like a little mini junction because the battery positive goes here too. Okay, and here I'm putting a 2-gauge wire. Now be careful with the gauges of the wires. It all depends on how many amperage, how much amperage draw or how many amps you're pushing on that wire, on the gauge wire you need to select, and how many feet, or else you can have a voltage drop if you don't have the correct wire for the correct amount of feet. So there's scales you could look online for that, what wire gauge to use at length and amperage. Here I decided to use a 2-gauge wire, and the gauges go like this. It's basically, I think I've written down right here, 0, and as you go down it's thicker. So I'm using a 2-gauge here and a 1/0 gauge. Basically you have the 0 gauge, you have a 1/0 gauge, and a 2/0 gauge, so far so forth. What I'm using here is a 1/0 gauge and a 2 gauge. So whenever you hear me mention 2 and 1/0, these are the gauges I'm using, and these are welding cables. Looks something like this. Alright. What was I doing? Oh yeah. Alternator, charge the battery. That wire that charges the battery is going to go here, and it's going to charge the battery this way because the junction's here. Or you could just go straight to the battery. Okay. And like I said, this is a 1/0 gauge, 1/0 gauge, 2 gauge. And over here I have a fusible link. It's essentially a mega fuse, a slow blow mega fuse. that's what I'm using there. It's one of these bad boys. Oops, upside down. This is a 175 amp. Now, with this, what you need to do is, if you don't know what amperage to get, have all your accessories on. Anything that takes power in your car, that draws amperage, turn everything on. Your headlights, your wind, any motor, you know, whatever, your windshield wipers, everything. Turn them on. And do an amperage draw test in series with the positive. You know, you collect your multimeter that can handle it. Make sure your multimeter can handle the amperage draw, because if it doesn't, you're going to burn the multimeter out. So you do it in series with the positive cable. You disconnect this one, you put it into the multimeter, you put it in line. And whatever reading you get there, with everything running, just get 15 to 25% extra for your mega fuse. Slow blow mega fuse. And this one in particular, little fuse, is the one that makes this one. And if you plan to put something with higher amperage later on in the future, you would have to change your mega fuse to a higher amperage fuse. And also make sure any wires you have in there can handle that. You don't want to fire now. Let's move forward. Okay. We have the alternator here. We had the wire that charges the battery, and the other wire that goes to the starter, which was the remote voltage sensing wire, excuse me. Now that wire I would just wire straight to the junction terminal. Okay. And you leave the other wire, the excite wire, where it is. In my case, where it is, because it goes into the ignition hot anyway source. Okay. This block here, this junction block, will be moved over to here. Okay. It won't connect to the battery anymore. So whatever wires you have in that junction block, move them here. This is your new junction terminal. Because what you're doing here is your disconnect switch is here, and everything else is over here. Remember I was saying starter, sorry about that, alternator and battery on one end, everything else on the other. This is a 2-gauge wire to this junction, and all the everything also, sorry, everything that was connected to your starter. Remember I said there was a junction here that all the fusible links go, and all, you know, this is like a big junction block. That all comes off the starter. All those wires go here to the junction terminal you're going to put here. Okay? I think that's all I have to say about this. The gauge wires here again are 2-gauge, 1 0-gauge, 2-gauge, 1 0-gauge. Fusible link, little fuse, mega fuses. And I think that's it. Thanks for watching.